Greetings, Unhidden Voices family, and welcome to episode 11. I'm really excited about this episode because it's a conversation with a dear friend of mine, Sister Amila El Amin. The word that comes to mind when I think of Amila is sustenance. Not only because she provides that sustenance for our community, she has been feeding our indigent, poor, elderly, homeless folks for decades. And she actually has launched a program called Eating Rights. You will learn more about that program and be provided with the opportunity to support and make sure that folks have access to basic human need, the right to eat. And Sister Amila ensures that, and so we're grateful to her for the work that she does in the community. I'm also grateful to her. Not everyone knows this, but she was one of the sisters who really was very supportive of my father when he was sick. She provided meals. She cooked his meals for him as I traveled to Sacramento. And the only thing we agreed upon was I would buy the food and she would cook it for him. And he called her daughter, and she's my sister. So I have much love for her. I think that you'll learn a lot from her just about what it means to just the struggles that we go through and how we can overcome those struggles, and the compassion that we need to have for each other. So listen, learn, and amplify with us.
So thank you for joining me, Sister Mila. I'm really looking forward to having this conversation with you. I'm very excited. So let's start with you telling us your name and telling us about yourself.
Hi, my name is Mila Colleen El Amin, and I was born Muslim. I'm African American, Black, Bilalian, and or whatever else they're going by, whatever's politically correct for a descendant of a slave these days. um, a descendant of enslaved people, let's be clear, because my ancestors were not slaves, they were enslaved. I'm co-founder of Muheed Incorporated, a nonprofit organization. I am the Bay Area outreach coordinator. My passion is feeding people, nourishing people with poetry and food. That's what I love to do. Those are two things I love to do the most. And you know, and my motto is everyone has a right to eat, and thus that's what I strive to do, is help people be able to eat. So alhamdulillah. Yeah, I live in Oakland, California. I'm the mother of three, the grandmother of I have 3, 2, 2. That's 7. So I'm the grandmother of 7. I'm the Mima of 7. Yeah, so that's me.
So you said you have a nonprofit called Muheed, and can you spell that for us and tell us like how could we find out more about it, and can you tell us the mission of it?
Okay, so Muheed is MU'EED, and the website is www.mueedinc.org. And I co-founded it in 1994. And basically Mu'eed is an Arabic word that means restorer. And so basically our biggest venture to date is our Children's Keeper foster care agency that we have that's out of Sacramento. It used to be in Solano County as well. But it's based now in Sacramento County, and we have coordinated Humanitarian Day in Oakland for the last 13 years. We've always had some type of Feed the Hungry program. We've done reuniting mothers with their children, incarcerated mothers with their children program. We've done substance abuse programs, recovery in Islamic recovery, Miladi Islami. We used to co-sponsor that in Vallejo for people, Muslims who are in recovery. So basically, our newest venture right now is called Eating Rights, and it is a program that we would, our intention is to feed the unhoused, the hungry, and the homeless, as well as the inner city elderly in our community with halal hot meals that would either be delivered to the curbsides and or the doorsteps of those in need.
All right, so I wanted to ask you, you said you do Humanitarian Day, and can you explain what is that?
Humanitarian Day is a day that was founded by the M Foundation, the Intellect, Love, and Mercy Foundation out of Southern California. And what they did was they started Humanitarian Day in Southern Cal, and then they created a coalition for other organizations to join and to either assist them, you know, like to coordinate with them in sponsoring this day of giving, and or, you know, in other areas, you would do the same thing. And so each Humanitarian Day effort is different because you kind of base it on the needs of your community. And so, like in the Bay Area, we do and it has evolved because the homelessness in the Bay Area has changed. So like when we first started doing it, we would kind of like coordinate our our efforts, and we would go around to the different homeless places, and we invite the homeless to come and take part in the services that we were offering, you know, hot meals, haircuts, hygiene kits, socks, that sort of thing, and medical screenings, social services where they could sign up for different resources in the community. One year we did HIV testing. And so it was basically kind of like a day where we would provide services to the homeless, as well as we would do a school supply and backpack giveaway. Because this was an effort that takes place in Ramadan, and this Ramadan, due to COVID, we weren't able to do it in that manner. But when we first started doing it 13 years ago, back to school and Ramadan coincided, and so we were able to do them at the same time. As Ramadan, as the years went on, and being that Ramadan is on the lunar calendar, the back to school time did not coincide with Ramadan, so we began to have, and in addition to that, the homeless situation changed, and all of these encampments started popping up all over the city. And so trying to get people to come to trying to get the homeless to actually come out to the event was a bit harder. And so what we started doing was kind of like, we started calling it Humanitarian Day Takes a Road Trip. And we would literally take the products, you know, or the goods and the food, the meals and the hygiene kits and those type of things. We take them to the encampments, and we couldn't do it like in one, you know, because we'd have to hit like 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 encampments. And so it was a day of just caravanning through the city and giving it away. And then the backpack giveaway would still coincide with going back to school. And so we would do that in West Oakland at Willie Keys Recreation Center on Union and 32nd.
So can you explain, like, how would someone help out with the effort? Like, how would they make a donation, or what's the process for that?
Okay, so right now we have a current campaign going on right now. We're pretty close to meeting our current goal. You could go to muheedincorporated.org, and again, that's M as in Mary, U as in umbrella, E as in Edward, E as in Edward, D as in dog, I as in igloo, N as in Nancy, C as in cat. and you can make a donation there. You can make a donation to Muheed as a whole. You can make a donation to the Eating Rights Project, which is our newest project that we're looking to get off the ground. You can make a donation to the backpack giveaway. You can make a donation to Humanitarian Day. So if you go to our website, and it says support us. When you get to the page, if you click on support us, all of our campaigns are there and you can make a donation there.
So you talked a little bit about this being something like feeding people you feel is your passion. Can you talk about where that came from and how you developed the passion for that and for poetry, and describe a little bit? And can you actually share a poem with us?
That's interesting. Could I share a poem with you? Maybe so. I might do that. Subhanallah. So feeding people. So to be honest, and most people kind of be like, "Are you kidding me?" So I was born Muslim, and not like the whole everybody's born Muslim thing, but I was actually born to Muslim parents, and the 5 pillars of Islam are, you make the declaration that there is no God but the one God, and that Muhammad, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, is the messenger of God. You pray 5 times a day. You give charity. You fast the month of Ramadan, and you make the pilgrimage to Hajj. And and so as a child growing up, like the actual charity or zakat that is spoke about in Islam is actually, there's a technical aspect to it. Like there's, if you have a certain amount of savings, and you've had that savings for over a year or for a year, that you have to pay, and it's not a part of your everyday living, like it's not a part of your necessities, then you're supposed to pay like a poor rate on that. And that poor rate is 2.5% of whatever the value is. But as a child, I didn't know anything about the 2.5 poor rate. And so for me, it was so when I thought of charity as a child, I thought of, you give, you feed people. That's what charity was to me. And where I got that concept from was reruns of Shirley Temple, because most of the Shirley Temples always had a soup kitchen. And that's where, that's where Shirley Temple would find her daddy if she got lost. That's where the orphan would find, like the soup kitchen was always the place where everybody found everybody. And so as a young child growing up in the community that I grew up in, we had what was called a cultural center. And so I remember as a little kid, as a child growing up, thinking, why don't we have a soup kitchen? Like, why aren't we giving charity? Like, because in my mind, charity meant you fed people. And so that was my very first concept of, and I always, so then as I grew up and as I got older, I developed this idea of like, no matter how poor I thought I was or thought I wasn't, or you know what I mean? Like, I was never too poor to be able to cook a pot of beans or a pot of spaghetti to give it away.
Yeah.
Like, like if there's enough for one, there's an Islamic concept of, if there's enough for one, there's enough for two kind of thing. So it was always like, you can always afford to buy a bag of beans and cook it and make them taste tasty and make some cornbread muffins and go give it away to people, right? Like you're never too poor to do that. And it was my philosophy and my, just growing up as a teenager. Recently with your talking to your sister-in-law, actually, we were talking about where my passion, who was the very first homeless person I ever fed. Mm-hmm. And the very first homeless person I ever fed was my father. Um, my father was an alcoholic. Um, he my mother was a victim of domestic violence, and when they divorced, like many, his world was over, and he didn't have anything to live for because he lost everything that was ever important to him, which was my mama and his children. Yeah. But for the safety of herself and her children, she had to abandon that marriage because it was a very abusive marriage. But and as a teenager, kind of like telling my business, I was a struggle for my mother. Let's just say that. And I was a bit rebellious. I was due to some personal experiences. I really wasn't trying to have nothing to do with Muslims, because they were all frauds and fakes as far as I was concerned, because of personal experiences that I had. And so I ended up living with my grandmother. And my grandmother, the neighborhood that my grandmother lived in, was off of San Pablo and 63rd. And my father used to hang out at a liquor store, Gateway Liquor, on, I think it was like, I want to say 59th. It was like right off of Stanford and San Pablo, like right up the street, right near the Black Muslim Bakery and all of that. And that's where he would be, and so. And
that was in Oakland?
Yeah, that was in North Oakland. And so I would see him, so one day he was like, asked me what I cooked for him. And he bought the food. Like he had panhandled or whatever, and he bought some beans and some ground beef and probably some tomato paste or whatever. And he asked me, and I was staying with my grandmother at the time, which is my mother's mother. And because of the abuse that my father had, accosted on my mama, my grandmother didn't like him very well. If you ask them, they hated each other. But he asked me, so what he told me to do was to take this food home and to tell my grandmother that I wanted to cook for her. So like it was like I was cooking for my grandmother. and so when I would do that, I would like have a jar and I would make, a portion for my father, and I would take it to him. So one of these times that I was doing this, my grandmother caught me putting the chili in the jar. And she asked me what was I doing, and I didn't lie. I mean, because I could have said, well, I'm just taking some food to my friend, or you know what I mean, I'm just packing I'm going to be out late, and whatever. But I said, I just told her, she said, who is that for? And I said, my father. And she went off and asked me how dare me be cooking for my father in her kitchen, and how much hurt he caused on my family, blah, 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 blah. And she was hurt because here she thought I was just trying to do, a good deed for her, and, trying to contribute to the household. And here I was behind her back. And so basically that's the first homeless person I ever fed was my father. And so, and again, my passion for feeding homeless people does not come from the fact that my father was homeless and I fed him, because my thoughts was when I was way younger, like way before that incident, because that happened when I was a teenager. But I just remember as a little girl going to the masjid, and there was this big building across the street called the Cultural Center, and we would do different events in that building. And I just always thought as a little kid that one of the events we should do is a soup kitchen. And and over time, just like fasting the month of Ramadan is one of those things that really lets you know what hunger is, especially if you've ever fasted in the summer. Like fasting in the winter months, it's kind of breezy, easy breezy, you know what I mean? You don't start, you stop eating at 6 and you start eating at 5:30. You know what I mean? So it's not even a whole 12 hours.
Right.
But in the summer, when you start fasting at 4:15 in the morning and you don't break fast till 8:35, you kind of get to know what it feels like to be hungry. And
Yeah.
so that's the other thing for me. Like, I remember at times, like sometimes, and fasting is one of my favorite acts of worship, right? Because it truly is something that is just between you and Allah. I always kind of like had this feeling like whenever I felt a hunger pain, that's like Allah caressing me. Like, I have this whole intimate idea of fasting, right? Like, I can really feel my creator, and he knows this is for him, and I know this is for him. And so like this whole intimate relationship that I have with fasting. But there are times when I'm fasting, like I've been fasting in Ramadan and even outside of Ramadan, where I was so hungry that I was in tears. And the tears didn't come from like, oh my God, I'm just in so much pain. The tears came from thinking about people who was feeling that feeling and had no idea where their next meal was coming from. Because whether I'm fasting in the winter or whether I'm fasting in the summer, I'm looking forward to iftar. I'm looking forward to it. And I got all these options, like, am I gonna go to the Senegalese iftar, or am I gonna go get some fish, or if I'm gonna just cook and I'm gonna make mac, like I got all these options on what I'm gonna eat when it's time to eat and overeat, because actually my stomach then shrunk and I shouldn't be eating that much. And so dates and water would have been enough, and that whole thing. But just thinking about people who is feeling the feeling that I'm feeling of hunger in that moment, and how uncomfortable that feeling is, and then knowing that there are people who are feeling that feeling, that woke up that morning feeling that way, went to sleep that night feeling that way, and would wake up the next morning feeling that way, and having no idea where their next meal was coming from. And so for me, it's just like, the least I can do is to try to be a means to help people not have that feeling, or at least know where that meal is going to come from. Because you think about like the breakfast program of the Black Panthers, and even people might say, well, don't give them credit, but the free lunch program. You know what I mean? Like, whatever you might say about the school, the Unified School District, and what they do and do not do, you know what I mean? And how quality the food is or is not. The fact of the matter is that there are children that come to school hungry. You know what I mean? And to be able to eat breakfast and then again be able to eat lunch, you know what I mean, takes away that feeling that I'm talking about, that they don't know where their next meal is going to be. So even if they go home and don't have dinner, you know what I'm saying, they're looking forward to their breakfast the next morning, and then their lunch in the afternoon. You know what I'm saying? And so, yeah, I could go on and talk about that for the next 3 hours. That'd be all your interview.
I really, really appreciate it, and I thank you for sharing your story with us, and the passion for it. And I think just hearing you speak of it, it's very emotional to hear it, and I understand why you would be emotional talking about it, because it's an emotional thing. But I want to make sure that I ask you about, you started talking about how your nonprofit deals with foster care, and I want to make sure that we talk about that, and like what is that, what are you actually doing, and what's the sort of like the problem with foster care, because I feel like a lot of people don't know anything about that, and since you're doing that work, I feel like we need to talk about it.
So I am the co-founder of the nonprofit that OCK is under, Our Children Keeper is under, but I am so not doing that work. That is my mother and my sister. So both my mother and my sister are social workers. They are licensed social workers. They are degreed social workers, and that is their baby. That is, so So to be honest, I can't give you a lot of information about the work that they do, short of they place children, they train parents to be foster parents, and then they place children from the system that comes into the foster care system, and they place them in homes, and they try to, train people so that they have quality homes. But that's the most I can tell you about our Children Keeper, because that's feeding people is my baby. That was their baby. And so though it is under the umbrella of Muheed, I don't do a lot of that work. Like I had to phase out of that work. I couldn't handle it. I used to work in group homes, and the emotional, you see, I'm crying about hunger pains. So you can just about imagine what I was like dealing with children who were being taken from their parents, and then they come into the foster care system, and the temporary, a lot of it is temporary, and just I did not have the emotional capacity to do that work, and so I left that to them, and I do this.
All right, well, let me ask you a question about the conversation you said you had with your grandmother about your father, because I don't want to leave it there without kind of knowing what the resolution was. And did you continue feeding your father, or was it just like at that was it, you weren't able to do
not
it?
Not in that manner. not out of my grandmother's kitchen, I didn't. And again, so for my father, it wasn't so. The difference between my father and most homeless people that I fed was I was my father's child, and I was a teenager. So I might have had a summer job, or I might have got an allowance or whatever, but I didn't, at the time, I didn't have the resources to just like go buy food. So any food that I cooked for my father, who was homeless, was food that he paid for money that he panhandled. You know what I mean? If that makes any sense. Like, and so once we didn't have a kitchen for me to cook it in, because my grandmother was gonna throw me off her porch. If I ever did it again, it just, because I didn't cook for my father every day. He would just, because he was panhandling, so he could go in the store and buy a sandwich or a burrito, but he would just want a home cooked meal. You know what I mean? And he had a daughter that was willing to do it for him, and so he would get the money together, and we'd go in. Like he would be sitting drunk in front of Gateway Liquor, and next door to Gateway Liquor, which is now Ghazali's Market, used to be Gateway Market, and we would go from his stoop in front of the liquor store. And I don't mean to laugh because it wasn't funny, but that's the reality. And as I'm telling you this, I've never thought about it, right? Like I've never regurgitated this part of the story. It's like he'd be there, I'd show up, we'd go in the Gateway, we'd buy the beans, we'd go to the meat market, and at the time we weren't really eating zabiha. I don't even know if I knew the essence of what halal meat was. I just knew I didn't eat pork. And I'd get ground beef, and we get the little package, the little brown, I don't know if you ever seen the little brown package of chilies, where it's in like a brown paper bag and it's and we get that because that's all the seasonings you needed, and a can of tomato sauce or tomato paste. And I'd go home and it'd be in my backpack, and then I'd be like, Grandma, I'm gonna cook dinner for us. I'm gonna cook chili, and and it was like, well, I guess she felt like, well, that's the only thing she know how to cook, so she cooked chili. But that was the thing that my daddy wanted, and I'd cook that chili, and I'd put it in a jar and take him some and leave it there, and we'd eat on chili for a couple of days. And then once the gig was up, and it was like he had to eat burritos that they put in the microwave because he wasn't getting no chili out of my grandmama's house. That was over. and so again, so that takes me to also the idea of you can always cook a pot of beans and give it away, because this was my father who was homeless, who was a wino, who, you know what I mean, who could come up with enough money to make a pot of beans. And it wasn't just enough beans for him. He only got a serving out of, like, whatever fit in the jar, that's what he got. And and it just even though I know my grandmother didn't appreciate it, right?
Yeah.
The fact of the matter is that he was feeding me and my grandmother.
Yes,
you know what I mean? That like that pot of beans fed us for a couple of days.
Yeah.
That pot of beans gave him a portion of beans for a meal. And maybe he might split it into two, depending on how big the jar was. But, you know, like though she was hurt by the effort, or hurt by the fact that I was sneaking into her kitchen, so to speak, and making beans for my father, who she couldn't stand, who beat my mama. The fact of the matter is that his energy wasn't, and bring me all my beans back, because he didn't like my grandmother neither, you know, and his attitude wasn't, you know, and pack up most of the beans and only leave, you know what I mean? Like, he knew he was feeding my grandmother. He knew he was feeding me, and that wasn't a problem, you know what I mean? And all he wanted was, you know, a home cooked meal.
Yeah.
And,
So
the dysfunction of the enslaved.
Well, there's some really powerful messages that are underlying what you're talking about, and I don't want to lose them, because I think it really matters, like, even in terms of like how somebody could have some redemption about themselves, even if, you know, they, like, I think a lot of times we write off people that are homeless, or we write off people that are alcoholics, or we do those things, but then that person is still a human being and they still have capacity to do something right. So, and like the story that you're telling, it's like your father was able to, you know, he was homeless, but he was able to feed you and your grandmother, and you learned from him that you could feed people with the very little, because there was somebody that didn't have anything and he was able to feed people. So that's so, wow. That blows me away. That blows me away.
It blows me away because it blows me away because my father was a Muslim. Though he was a wino, he was a Muslim.
Yeah.
And I remember my mom telling me one time that my father told her, use me as an example to my children as what they don't want to be. Like still thinking about us. I mean, there's many stories I can tell you about my father. Like when I was running the streets acting a fool, that wino could spot me from anywhere. and I mean, and I don't say that wino as disrespect. I mean, from his drunken stupor, where he would almost be falling all over himself. You know what I mean? If he saw me 6 blocks up, he would yell, hey, that's how he would do it. And I mean, he would yell it with this, where it almost rang through from Oakland through Emeryville to the end of Emeryville. Like, I'd hear him. And I would cringe almost, because I was like, oh crap. You know, and it wasn't like he would see me and be like, give me some money or give me some change. My daddy never asked me for anything besides to cook for him, right? So it wasn't like I was cringing because he was about to try to take my lunch money or something. Like, I was cringing because he was still being a father. He was like, who are these people? And he'd question my friends, and he'd question the guy that I was with, and, you know, tell him if they hurt me, he'd kill them. And, you know, like he was still my father, you know what I mean? And I mean, one time we had got a hotel, and my father spotted me going into a hotel. Like, we had all got this hotel, and, you know, some of them were older than us and they could get hotels. Like, you might need to edit this out. We don't need this about Sister Mila. But we did. We had a hotel, and it was the Chaparral Hotel on 54th in San Pablo. And a bunch of us was like hanging out there because I was cutting school and doing all this kind of stuff. And my father spotted me going into the hotel. And the people that I were hanging with, they thought I was 18. They didn't know that I was, at the time, I think probably 15 or whatever. And so my daddy spotted me going into this hotel. He called the police, had them come to the hotel, to the manager's office, to find out what room we were in, and got us put out the hotel because I was a minor.
Wow.
and the people was with me was like, ain't no minors here, ain't no minors here. And I was like, oh Lord. And so I had, back then, you know, you had Medi-Cal, right? And I had my, it was Medi-Cal stickers. Like when you went to the, I ain't thought about this in 3 years, but when you went to the doctor, they took a sticker off and put it on whatever paperwork to show, you know, that you were on Medi-Cal. So in my purse was my Medi-Cal stickers. And so when the people were, when other people were like, we don't have no, you know, everybody here is over 18, blah, 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 blah. There was a sister, there was a Mila sitting there like, oh crap. And so the police searched us.
Wow.
Searched our stuff, you know, because this man, and I'm acting like I don't know my daddy. Like, I don't know this crazy drunk. Like, what is you talking about? and so let me take that back. They didn't search everybody's stuff. They searched my stuff to see if there was anything in my stuff that would tell my age. And when they went in my purse, they found my Medi-Cal sticker, and it said I was born in January 27th, 1969, and thus I was not over 18. and everybody got kicked out the hotel because the manager was mad. And, you know, my friends were, I mean, you know, like they understood why I lied, but, you know, they was kind of mad, but not, you know, because didn't nobody get arrested. And the police took me home to my grandmother's because that's where I was living. And so, yeah. So I say that to say that we do write people off, you know, and like that was my father. So I know his story, right? But I don't know the story of the rest of these homeless people. And I know that when they were little kids, they didn't grow up and say, I want to be a homeless person living on the freeway. Like that was not their greatest aspiration when they were in the 3rd grade, you know? And that wasn't what their parents thought that they would be when they grew up. You know what I mean? Like that's not how we start up. Nobody grows up and say, you know, what do you want to be when you grow up? A bum under the freeway on dope. Like nobody does it, right? And recently, I have to share this because recently in the new project that we've embarked upon, eating rights, and when I'm talking to people about the rights of people to eat, and like in Islam, there's an ayat in Quran that says that there are people who will say, when you talk to them about feeding the hungry or taking care of the poor, they say, why should we feed those if Allah had wanted to feed them? Okay, so in Islam, in the Quran, there's a verse that says, and I'm paraphrasing, that when people are encouraged to feed the hungry, the disbelievers would say, or they ain't got to be disbelievers. They could just be people who think people should pull themselves up by their own bootstraps kind of thing. That why should we feed those who, if God had wanted them to be fed, he could have fed them himself, right? And so a lot of times, as a person who has been doing this type of work for a long time, and I've worked with many organizations, most of the organizations that I work for, we either feed once a week or work with. We either feed once a week or twice a month or something. And I've always had this nagging feeling like sometimes I go home on a Saturday, like beating myself up and asking Allah to forgive me that I'm not going to return again to feed people until the next Saturday, right? Like these 200 people, 250 people, 300 people who were just in line that got food from us won't be hungry again until next Saturday. You know what I mean? Or working with organizations where they feed twice a month. And I'm not, so before I continue, let me say that think no charity too small, because even a smile is a charity, right? So it's not to belittle these efforts. It's just to say what goes on inside of a Mila.
Yes.
And so I'm not dissing anybody else for what they do. I'm saying that everybody has a plight, and I feel like God is going to ask me, what made you think you could go home on Saturday and not show up again until Saturday? Like, that's what he puts in me. Like, he may not put that in other people. And can't be responsible for what other people feel, you know, but I have to be accountable for what comes up for me. And so as I do that, you know, that's one of the things that come up for me. And so thus eating rights. Now, as I was having a conversation with someone recently, like in the last, because I started a campaign at the last 10 days of Ramadan to try to raise some money, to try to, you know, be in a position that if we find a commercial kitchen that we can put the down payment down, because we want to be in a place where we can store up, like renting a commercial kitchen doesn't really give you the access that we're going to need to be able to feed people on a daily basis. And so we kind of need a kitchen that is exclusively ours, and we dictate what goes on in it. So we've been doing fundraisers over time to be in a position to be able to at least fund that, because it seems if we get a kitchen and then we scream, you guys help us not lose the kitchen, we might get more support. Allah knows best. But because we don't have a kitchen, people keep going, well, what are you doing? So, but in a conversation that I was having with someone, and I was talking about how the signs that Allah gives us, the signs that God gives us about the rights. Why do I call it? They kept asking me, why do you say eating rights? You know, and most people think that when I say eating rights, that I'm talking about eating right. Like, you should eat right, and this is what you should have. You should have this many vegetables. And right. But that's what it is eating rights. Everyone has the right to eat, right? And so one of the examples that our Creator gives us in creation, one of the signs that he gives us in creation, is that every human being is born with a already made meal for them in the milk of their mother. And that child doesn't have to qualify for that. That child doesn't, you know what I mean? Like, it don't have to pay for that. Like, it's born, there's milk, and it is fed. And if you go with the Quranic recommendation, that child is fed for 2 years. And for the most part, what that child get is enough to sustain it, right? And so, and I mean, surely once the teeth start coming and they want to do some other stuff, but for the most part, the nutrition that is in that food is enough to sustain that human being. And so for me, in God saying there are signs in all things for those who are willing to reflect, that is another confirmation for me that every person has a right to eat, because God starts every person off with, unless the mother dies, or you know what I mean, or you know, some other thing. And in old times there were wet nurses, and not even so old times, because in enslaved times we were wet nurses for the slaveholders' children, you know. And so even if the mother wasn't nursing the child, somebody was nursing that child, you know what I mean? And so, yeah, I just wanted to share that.
So I have to ask you a question about this eating rights, because I feel like it's a play on words too, right? So, and was that intentional? Okay, and can you talk a little bit about your intention behind that?
So it wasn't intentional, meaning I was thinking eating right. It was intentional, meaning I wanted to figure out a way to convey to people that eating is a right. Like, we cannot look at eating as a luxury. You know, like, we should not look at mankind or people who are hungry and act as if them being able to have a nutritious meal is some luxury. Like, you know, like, you can survive without a car. A car is a luxury. You can survive without a phone. A cell phone is a luxury. You know what I mean? You can survive without shoes, and technically, you know, it is a luxury. Like, not having shoes, you won't die unless you step on a nail and get gangrene, or, you know what I'm saying? Like, like, no, we don't want to walk around barefoot. Some people, some people prefer it, but but if a person was born and died with no shoes, not having shoes would not be the cause of death. You know what I'm saying? If a person was, my grandmother never owned a car. She lived until she was 83. You know what I mean? She wasn't going to die because she didn't have a car. The bus worked just fine for her. And as many of our elders would tell you, they didn't even have a bus because they used to walk 5 miles to get to school and 5 miles home with no shoes.
Yes.
And so we know that that's not a necessity, right? Eating is a necessity.
Yes.
It's not a luxury.
Right.
And so eating rights that was the, and so now, so my play on words is this, is I love initials and I love acronyms, right? So I love to call something that would be an acronym, like what, I don't know. I'm trying to think of one. Help me think of one.
NAACP.
Well, no, so the NAACP is more initials and not an acronym, right? Because an acronym would kind of be like,
its own word, like.
Right, like SWAT. And then it's sisters with an attitude and tenacity. Or, you know what I'm saying? Like, that sort of thing. So eating rights, the initials of eating rights is ER. And when you think of ER, what do you think?
Emergency room.
There you go. So for me, when I say the ER project, it brings to mind urgency. You know what I'm saying? And I can't even take the credit for that. I got to give all glory to God, because when I came up with eating rights, I did not realize that the initials were ER. Like, that wasn't the first thing. Yeah. But when I went and said ER, I was like, shut the fat up. Look at the Lord working here. Like, you know, like literally, I was like, this is so dope. Like, Allah, you are so divine. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I wasn't even all the way there. Like, but you knew. And girl, I was having a little I was testifying and everything.
All right, so I have a question, and it's a 2-part question. Because I want to get back to the soup kitchen idea, because it sounds like one of the things that you're trying to do is get your soup kitchen that you had always. Because you said you want a working kitchen.
So we want a working kitchen. Soup kitchen means people got to come and sit down and do all that. That's a whole nother thing. And the way that homelessness is right now, that model doesn't, for me, what people need is like so speaking of Tariq, may Allah forgive him his sin and grant him Jannah. So Tariq called me one time at 10:30 at night. And the first thing he says is, Assalamu alaikum, Sister Mila. Please apologize to your husband for me and tell him I'm so sorry for calling you so late, but I just have one question. And I'm like, what's the question, Brother Tariq? And he goes, what do you think about a roach coach without the roaches that drives around the city and feeds the homeless people? And I said, I think that's a great idea. Brother Tariq, especially if you're not gonna have no roaches.
Mm.
You know. And so Mercy on Wheels that ICNA has
Yeah.
is the idea of Brother Tariq. That was his idea. So they didn't do it to its fruition of his idea, because the paperwork and the red tape and all of that to actually have a food truck
Yeah.
was too much. So what they did was they partnered with some restaurants. They got these trucks that say Mercy on Wheels and these vans that say Mercy on Wheels that we load these warmers up in, and they go out and they feed. So right now, that's the motto. It's not a motto of a soup kitchen where, like St. Vincent de Paul, where people will come and sit down and eat. Maybe that'll come later. But number one, it requires far more space. It requires far more red tape. Whereas what we're looking to do right now is to kind of accommodate the need that is present, which is curbside communities, you know, that may not be able to get to the soup kitchen, you know, and to get to the soup kitchen requires them to leave all of their personal belongings.
Yeah.
You know, and so it's to secure a certified kitchen
Yeah.
where we can have the health department and all of those entities come in and certify us as a place where we can cook food and have, you know, the cooks and the chefs and and do all of that. And then we would do the similar to what Mercy on Wheels is doing. We'd place it in commercial warmers that would keep the food at the temperatures in which the health department says it needs to stay at. And then we would deliver it to the curbside communities, but we would also deliver it to the identified elders in our community in the inner city, not just Muslims, but Muslims as well. And they would too receive a halal, hot, nutritious meal.
All right, so you need to please explain who Tariq is, because when you first said Tariq, I thought you meant my husband Tariq, and then I was like, no, I know because I know who you mean because we talked about it yesterday, and then you also said ICNA, which people might not know what ICNA is either. So can you explain?
Okay, so ICNA is the Islamic Circle of North America, and they have a Bay Area chapter, the San Francisco chapter. And then under that chapter, they have ICNA Relief. So that is the organization that I've worked with, over the years. And Tariq is, and I can never say his name properly, last name properly. It starts with K and an H, or K-A-W. I can never remember how to spell his name, how to say his name properly. But was one of the very first people that I met in ICNA at the first Abraham's Day. Very inspirational brother, very loving, subhanAllah, who was actually killed some years ago doing what he does the most, and that was helping someone. There was a car accident on the freeway. He was coming home from visiting his granddaughter in the hospital because one of his children had had a child, I think it was his son, and had a child, and the child had to be in the hospital for some time. And so Brother Tariq would go visit his granddaughter during the day and be there with her until the parents would come in the evening. And sometimes he would stay really late. And his last name is Khanzada, Khanzada.
Mm-hmm.
And one particular day he had left the hospital, sound like it was like after midnight, or it was late in the day, and early in the morning actually, and there was a car accident and he stopped to help the person. And when he stopped to help the person, a drunk driver hit him and he was killed.
That's sad.
And what was interesting was that most of us, most everybody, like, though it was very tragic,
Mhm.
it was a very tragic situation. Nobody could disagree that Brother Tariq doing what he did, doing what he loved the most, and that was helping people. And it didn't matter if he knew those people or not, you
Yeah.
know, because most people would not stop on a freeway at 1 in the morning to
Yeah.
help anybody, you
Yeah.
know. But what Brother Tariq did, and a drunk driver hit him, didn't realize. And I don't know real details, you know, because that's a hard thing,
Yeah.
like to to ask a family member about, like, so what exactly happened, you know. Like but basically, from what was we read in the article, was that there was a drunk driver who either hit the car and the car hit him, or hit him
Mhm.
while he was trying to get help for the person.